Yo, what's good with you? Back in black with another Enlisted video. If you guys are new to the channel and you love shooting games just like me, make sure you aim for that like button and shoot that subscribe button as well. It'll help you find better teammates and improve skill-based matchmaking. At least I hope so. In this video, we're going to be comparing all the BR3 light machine guns for the Imperial Japanese Army and Enlisted to see which of them is the best for you and your particular playstyle. Coming up first, we'll be taking a look at the Type 96 light machine gun, designed by Kajiro Nambu and introduced in the year of 1936. This machine gun was used in the interwar period as well as World War II, firing the 6.5mm Aries soccer rounds from its top-loaded magazine. The gun design was a combination of the ZB-26 captured from the Chinese prior to World War II and the Hotchkiss machine gun purchased from France during the Russo-Japanese War. A lot of the desire for the Type 96 was prompted by the unpopularity of the Type 11 LMG from my previous video due to reliability and gun jamming issues. Ironically, the Type 96 would suffer from similar ailments according to troop testimony. But getting into the stats, we're getting a maximum damage of 11.2, which is going to be lowest in the tier unfortunately, but don't fret, as that is still over the killing threshold, and even out to 100 meters, you're still going to be doing 10.1 damage. When it comes to light machine guns, usually you're going to be shooting your machine gun in burst if not full auto anyway, so even if the first hit doesn't kill your opponent outright, odds are the second bullet will before you finish blinking. Our bullet velocity is coming in at 730 meters per second, which is middle of the pack, but still pretty respectable as far as bullet velocity is concerned in a general sense. You will have to do some shot leading for very far targets, but considering the rate of fire is only clocking in at 550 rounds per minute, which is very much on the low side for a machine gun, you shouldn't burn through too much of your ammo before being able to adjust your aim. That 550 rounds per minute is tied across the board for all machine guns today as well, just a heads up, but reload speed on the other hand is anything but slight, coming in at 3.1 seconds, which is also middle of the pack and still kinda slow generally speaking, so I do encourage alternate reloading whenever convenient to do so. And for those of you who detest slower fire rates on light machine guns, a neat way to look at the bright side is that when you look at the less than stellar reload times on any machine gun, especially this one, you can obviously circumvent that by getting in as many alternate reloads as you can, and this is a lot easier to do when you pay attention to your ammo counter, so I would encourage you to do that a lot as well. Coming up next is a stat category that the Type 96 can finally boast about. We're getting a shot deviation at 31, which is going to be best in the tier by a good margin, and this lets you know that this is the machine gun that's going to be best suited for fully automatic fire. But that's not the only reason this gun is going to be acclimated for holding down the trigger. I've never seen this on an LMG, but we're getting a gargantuan 60% recoil control on this LMG. Like, what the hell? That's insane, dude. I've never looked at this gun extensively until now, but obviously I've always wondered why the Type 96 shot like a laser beam. Now we know that it's due to this godly stat right here. Not to mention that the vertical recoil is coming in at a vertical stat of 33 and a horizontal stat of 13, which are both best in the tier as well. Like, holy shit, man, calm down Type 96. I didn't even mention it yet, but just in case you didn't think this gun was R farming enough, it also comes with a bayonet, cause why not? Why not bayonet charge with my heavy ass 9.3 kilogram machine gun? But nah, for real, before you guys get too excited about the addition of a stabby stab on your machine gun, I will admit that the melee hitboxes in this game are pretty jank generally speaking, but it is nice to have a bayonet charge over a rifle butt any day if you've tried both and you know which one is usually more useful. But anyways, that weight at 9.3 kilograms is going to be middle of the pack, and that is going to be coupled along with a 65% sprint factor, which is also going to be middle of the pack, so you can get around with this gun moderately fast and it won't drain your stamina that bad. Nice to know that this gun will shine where it needs to at the very least. The last thing that I really wanted to mention on this gun is the 30 round box magazine, which is tied for best in the tier, and the iron sights, which as we know are unfortunately unable to achieve that first place ranking due to the obstructive nature of a top loaded magazine in general. But I will say the aiming experience with the Type 96 is top 2 for a top loaded magazine in general due to the little green dot behind the peephole that provides great contrast, and actually helps immensely when it comes to lining up targets. Thankfully, the front post or the blades on this weapon aren't too thick either. Whenever I'm actually aiming, it doesn't cover the entire target, and you'll see how these little things add up to equal a pretty decent, if not moderately good aiming experience in comparison to one of our later competitors. But other than that, I had a pretty good time with the Type 96. Coming up for contestant number 2, we shall now take a look at the SIG KE7, hailing from Switzerland of all places and being designed by Gotthard End and Paul Corrali, which may be a familiar name to BR4 Axis SMG users. This gun was made in 1929, a decade before World War II actually started, and although it was never used by the Swiss Army, lots of them were exported to China and used during the Chinese Civil War and the Second Sino-Japanese War. Getting into the stats, this time we're getting a maximum damage at 12 flat, which is very much in line with most machine guns you will come across in the game of Enlisted, but also tied for highest in the tier today, so you can see the Type 96 was the outlier there. The slightly higher number shouldn't have too much of a noticeable impact on your gameplay, unfortunately, because of the nature of machine guns and how fast you're shooting anyways. You probably wouldn't notice much of a difference for a singular bullet anyhow. Keeping in line with the theme of slight improvements, we're also getting a new bullet velocity at 750 meters per second, which happens to be first in the tier, so slightly less shot leading to do with the KE7 for those further out targets, but only the slightest of differences to be had here. The rate of fire, like I said earlier, is tied across the board at 550 rounds per minute, but the reload speed on the KE7 is stoutly better at a tier best 2.4 seconds, and that's whether you do an alternate reload or not. So I would say whenever you're not actively shooting at somebody, I would try to get a reload in there, because we're getting a worse than tier bullet capacity with a 25 round box magazine, which is the Achilles heel of this weapon, if I do say so. Shot deviation is also taking a bit of a hit and going down to a middle of the pack 33, which isn't horrible, but not anything you want to see with a reduced magazine count. I guess this would be a great time to mention that unlike the other two competitors, you can actually put the KE7 in semi-auto mode for more ammo conservation, which I'd highly recommend or consider depending on the range of your enemy. But I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that, as it does make the weapon way more versatile overall, or at least it makes it a lot easier to deal with that reduced magazine count. But like most machine guns, we are going back down to a typical recoil control percentage of 10%, which makes me sad, and we're getting a vertical recoil stat of 43, which is by far worse than the tier. Definitely something you can see in the recoil testing if you pay attention to how quickly the gun moves upward. The horizontal recoil is middle of the pack at 15, and luckily that isn't really translated into the game heavily, because I'd say the KE7 doesn't have much left or right movement at all. just harder to manage the vertical recoil, which is again exacerbated by the small magazine size. Another cool thing I can say about the KE7 is that it's the lightest gun out of the bunch at 9 kilograms flat, which retains your stamina the best and allows you to sprint the fastest with a sprint factor of 80%, which is also best in the tier. Last thing I wanted to say about the KE7 positively and generally is that I believe these are easily the best iron sights in the tier. Not that they're amazing, but this is the only one where you don't have to deal with the top loaded distraction mag, so that's reason enough for me to give it first place in this category. But to bring it back down a peg, this is also the only LMG we'll talk about today that does not have a bayonet, so that is also something you may want to consider along with the lower magazine count. Coming up for our final competitor of the day, we now gotta take a look at the Type 99 LMG, which was supposed to be an improvement and a replacement for the Type 96 mentioned earlier. Main difference being that the Type 99 had the stronger 7.7mm Arisaka cartridge, which was supposed to, well, not even supposed to, it literally did have 50% more energy than the previous bullet used. But aside from that, it was essentially the same gun, which was often confused for a Bren or a ZB light machine gun. Getting into the stats, the higher damage is translated into the game here as well, but also, like I said earlier, is not much of an improvement as we're still capped out at 12 per shot like any other LMG. Of course, that'll go down to 10.8 at 100 meters. Ironically, despite the bullet having more energy, we're getting a worse than tier bullet velocity at 710 meters per second, so that doesn't really make much sense to me, but whatever. We all know the rate of fire is the same across the board at 550 rounds per minute, so nothing notable there. But prepare for more bad news as we're getting the worst in tier reload speed as well at 3.5 seconds, which means you'll want to be alternate reloading with this one in particular as often as possible if you plan on using it extensively. The woes of the Type 99 don't stop there either, unfortunately, as we're also taking a hit to our shot deviation again, which will bring us up to a total of 36, which is also worst bullet spread in the tier. Surely the dev who designed the stats for the Type 99 had a vendetta against it or something, because we also got the same basic recoil control percentage at 10%, but it's coupled with a vertical recoil of 36, which isn't the worst nor the best in the tier. But when you look at the horizontal recoil of 21, which is horribly worse in the tier, that's a nasty combo, which makes this gun very unwieldy and unfun to use and handle. And not to mention that this gun is also the heaviest and the clunkiest gun out of the group with a weight of 10.6 kilograms and a sprint factor of 55%, which is also worse than the tier. Goes without saying that this gun will drain your stamina the most and be extremely cumbersome feeling when sprinting, so pull out that knife when you have a chance to do so. The biggest insult to injury on this gun is going to be the iron sights, which feature a front blade that is way too thick. Not only are the front blades or the front coats way thicker on the Type 99 in comparison to the Type 96. When you're actually aiming and you take a look at the rear sight, you will notice that there's a lack of a green dot. Obviously that makes it a lot harder to add a little bit of contrast in those darker areas and help you line up your target. And also, generally speaking, I would just say the rear sight on the Type 99 is just more blurry, making it worse. And then, like I said, when you factor in the recoil on top of the pretty bad aiming experience, you can just forget about it. Essentially, it's just one of those LMGs that makes it so that you only want to use it in close range, and trying to use it at medium and long range just becomes more trouble than it's worth, honestly, in my humble opinion. But hey, it does also have a bayonet that essentially ends up being inconsequential in the grand scheme of things, but it does look pretty cool. I think overall you could say this gun is a pretty shameful upgrade for the Emperor in comparison to the Type 96. But yeah, man, in conclusion, this is one of those tiers where there's one gun that you clearly want to avoid, and then there's a close battle between the other two competitors. Me personally, I don't like when that's the case and one gun is so easily dismissible, especially when it's the last unlock. So I do have some ideas to improve it and make the tier more competitive overall. But of course, coming in last place is going to be this shitty ass Type 99. Like the game stated, in theory, it should have been a stronger and better version than the Type 96, but it fails in almost every category aside from a smidge extra damage. Unacceptable in my personal opinion. As far as what I would do to actually change the gun if I was sitting down face to face with the developer and he asked me what I actually wanted, the first thing I would say is if he could please do a pass on the iron sights to make them more usable like the Type 96, maybe add that green dot on the back, or maybe make the blades on the front a little bit thinner so they're not as thick and obstructive. If not that, I have an even better idea. From my research, I saw that the Type 99 could actually be fitted with a 2.5 telescopic sight, and those were usually given to the best marksman in the squad. I think this would be a great addition to add to the game. You don't even have to touch the recoil because that would be a bit of a balancing factor. But the only other thing I would consider adding is to improve the bullet velocity, because if the Type 99 is supposed to have a stronger bullet, why would the bullet velocity be lower than the Type 96? That doesn't make any sense. And without any of those considerations, I honestly don't think there's even a good reason to use this gun at all. So that's why it ends up in last place. Again, I want to take a second to emphasize how bad of a feeling it is when you're playing a grindy game like Enlisted and you reach the last item in a tier and unlock it only to find out that it's not really that viable or useful in any way, shape, or form. This could be applied to any BR in any faction, and it's just not really good for one's psyche when playing this game. So more of a reason I highly recommend taking a look at that Type 99. But neither here nor there, coming in second place is going to be the KE7. This gun has some really good stats, honestly speaking, and arguably, if not definitively, the best iron sights in the tier. My main gripe with this weapon really just boils down to one nitpick and one major issue. The nitpick is going to be the vertical recoil, which is absurdly high in comparison to our first place winner, and when you can get more shots on target easier while still holding down the trigger for an extensive period of time, that is a major advantage. The other thing is going to be that you are constantly worried about ammo conservation with this gun, considering the really small magazine. So yeah, even with the better iron sights, I think I would rather have a machine gun that has more bullets and more damage output overall. With that said, we can tell the best LMG here is going to be the Type 96 with a superb recoil pattern, a larger magazine than the KE7, and that obviously gives it the edge. I'm not going to sit up here and say that the iron sights are amazing, but again, it's as good as it could be for a Bryn clone, and that green dot really does help with the contrast. And did I mention that this gun, aside from being a laser, also has a bayonet? But yeah, just in case, that's really all I wanted to add, and I gotta say that this gun was the easiest to get gameplay for and use. But I do want to ask, what do you guys think? Which gun is your favorite in the tier, and would you guys be interested in adding a scope to the Type 99? At the end of the day, these are just my personal opinions, but I am hoping with the combination of the gameplay and my explanations, you guys can decide for yourself which LMG is best for you to spend your silver on and upgrade over and over again for your Japanese Japanese infantry. If you enjoyed or learned something useful, don't forget to aim for that like button and shoot that subscribe button as well. Hope you find better teammates and improve your skill-based matchmaking. And yeah, don't forget to hype the video, get it out there to other people. And yeah, appreciate you guys very much for watching.